visit from Vladimir Putin? The Kremlin claims President Trump invited Russia's leader to the White House. Rebuilding Iraq. Iraqi Christians are hopeful as they return to a town once held by ISIS. Easter message. Pope Francis prays for peace around the world. And having a ball. Why Catholic schools are so successful in one of America's most popular sports. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, April 2nd, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Today marks the first time another country has formally placed tariffs on U.S. goods. China takes aim at American products like pork, apples, and sparkling wine. It follows the Trump administration's recent trade sanctions. The Dow dives hundreds of points and puts Midwestern farmers on edge. Correspondent Jason Calvi tells us what's at stake. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. It's too early to call it a trade war, but investors are scrambling. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted. China today levels $3 billion of new import taxes on American products.
It's not just nuts. 128 things like American fruit, pork, and aluminum scrap will also be taxed. China says it's retaliation, a countermeasure in response to a previous U.S. move to slap tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. President Trump last month.
It's going to make us a much stronger, much richer nation.
He also threatened even more tariffs on some Chinese imports. He says it's needed to balance the trade debt with China, hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
Any way you look at it, it is the largest deficit of any country in the history of our world. It's out of control.
Iowa farmers braced for a Chinese blowback, which today is revealed to be a 25% tariff on U.S. pork.
China and some of those people are major places we export pork. Well, if we can't get rid of it, we can't get rid of it in the United States. Our market's going to go down.
Hog farmer Jeff Rader voted for Donald Trump, hoping for a better economy.
We're looking forward to more profits this year than last year because of the tax cut. Hopefully we don't have to give it all away due to the tariffs.
And Edward Jones, investment strategist, calls China's step small but significant, and it's creating new worries of escalating tariffs. A lot on the plate of Catholic convert Larry Kudlow. His first day as the director of the National Economic Council is today. Lauren?
Well, we know Kudlow doesn't see eye to eye with the president on tariffs, saying tariffs have almost never worked as intended and almost always deliver an unhappy ending.
It seems that Kudlow is not a yes man. He recently criticized the president's tariffs, saying American tariffs are really tax hikes for our country. But he says he supports President Trump's agenda, including slashing the trade deficit with China.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. President Trump invites Russian President Vladimir Putin to the White House despite growing tensions between the two countries. One of Putin's aides released the information saying the president extended the invitation when he called Putin to congratulate him for winning re-election. Now, it's not clear when or where the two leaders will meet, but Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says they're considering several venues here in Washington. The White House also confirms the president will meet with Japan's Prime Minister later this month. They say Shinzo Abe will join Mr. Trump at his Florida Mar-a-Lago resort on April 17th and 18th. They plan to discuss China tariffs, ongoing negotiations on NAFTA, and North Korea ahead of the president's planned meeting with leader Kim Jong-un. At today's annual Easter egg roll, the White House, the president addressed the DACA deal. Earlier, he tweeted the deal is dead because, quote, Democrats didn't care or act. DACA is the program that protects young immigrants known as dreamers from deportation. Since their parents illegally brought them to the U.S. as children, many say it's the only country they've ever known. And the president wanted Democrats to approve more money for the border wall in exchange for a DACA deal, but the two sides never came to an agreement.
The Democrats have really let them down. It's a shame. And now people are taking advantage of DACA, and that's a shame.
The president says he wants Republicans to use the nuclear option if necessary to muscle a border security bill through the Senate. The drastic change in rules would allow the measure to pass without any support from Democrats. Vince Coglianese, editorial director at the Daily Caller, host of Washington's Morning on the Mall on WMAL Radio, joins us now. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
I thought there was a deal. Why did the president have a change of heart?
Well, he had an offer. They never got to a deal, though. They never got to one where the Democrats agreed to pass something in order to keep DACA or Dreamers in the country. And he was done with this. I mean, he's been kind of letting this go for a while, constantly sort of putting it in the Democrats' court. He couldn't get any bites on this thing, so he gave up on it. The truth is, it's caught up in the court process right now. There's a lawsuit, several lawsuits that have locked it up in the court system, meaning even if the president wants to end DACA right now, he can't, not until the courts resolve it. And at that point, then it will conclude, and we'll see what happens.
So will there ever be a DACA border wall deal? Say that gets cleared up. Can they agree on anything?
Well, in a midterm year, no, I don't think they can. I mean, logically. But beyond this midterm, I think it is possible. I mean, we have heard the president express support for keeping DACA recipients in the United States. Even since the campaign, every time he was asked about this, he said, you've got to do something with heart. And that means he wants to keep them in the country. He's offered to allow not just DACA recipients, but up to 1.8 million so-called Dreamers, which is many, many more than the 700,000 or 800,000 DACA recipients, to stay in the United States.
Well, speaking of the midterms, a new report came out today from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection agency saying that there was a 2.4 increase in individuals apprehended while trying to enter the southwest border illegally in February. And that is a typical number for this month. I looked it up, and February tends to be right about that point. It tends to be an increase. Do you think that, though, this is going to give Republicans some ammunition coming up to the midterms to say, hey, look, we're seeing this uptick? Well,
the truth is most Americans, when you poll the question, think that a country should have real borders and should have a real immigration law, meaning we should get to decide who comes in and when. And any evidence that there are people who are crossing the border who are sort of flouting those laws and staying in the United States anyway does lead voters to wonder, well, how is that fair? It should be a fair process. So I think there's plenty of polling to support that Republicans can win on that issue if they run on it in a sound way.
All right, so if DACA doesn't come through, we now have the potential for a trade war with China. What is going to happen next? What's the big battle that the president is going to be fighting now?
Well, clearly, it's going to be a wait and see to see if China turns this into a real trade war. Obviously, at this point, what we know is they're responding to steel and aluminum tariffs. What they're not responding to yet is what the president announced last week, which is explicitly Chinese tariffs. So there could be more coming out of China. The thing I would point you at, though, is the Chinese have only put a couple $1 billion of tariffs against the United States. The U.S. trade deficit is hundreds of billions of dollars. Right now, this is more of a showpiece from China than it is, I think, an aggressive tariff action. The next thing to look out for is whether they are actually aggressive on tariffs.
Very good. Vince Coglianese, thank you so much. Editorial director at the Daily Caller.
Sure thing.
South Africa says goodbye to an icon. Winnie Mandela, the anti-apartheid leader and former wife of the late President Nelson Mandela, has died. According to her family, Mandela died in a Johannesburg hospital today. Her health began to fail earlier this year. Along with her former husband, Winnie Mandela became one of the most recognizable faces in the decade-long struggle to end apartheid. She was 81 years old. In a country that's 3/4 Catholic, a same-sex marriage supporter wins the presidential runoff election, defeating a candidate who opposed it. Carlos Alvarado, a center-left candidate in Costa Rica, wins roughly 60% of the vote. He wrote on Twitter, "Let's celebrate our 200 years of independence with a government worthy and up-to-date with the times." 18 Palestinians are dead after forcing a confrontation at the Gaza-Israel border. Thousands from the Palestinian territory Friday protested the 70th anniversary of Israel's founding by marching toward the border fence. Hamas leaders reportedly fired guns, threw stones, and burning tires. Gaza says more than 750 Palestinians were wounded. Israel says it has a right to defend its borders and denied unlawful use of lethal force. In a show of hope, Christians are returning to their towns in Iraq destroyed by ISIS. Calm has returned to the small town of Teleskov and to St. George's Church there in the Nineveh Plain. Villagers are asking for aid to help rebuild their homes. It's a town that I visited a year ago on Palm Sunday. Townspeople were beginning to come back, but didn't have electricity or plumbing. ISIS had left behind IEDs. Archbishop Bashar Warda, seen here leading the procession near his parish, has led the rehabilitation efforts in Teleskov. Syrian Christians celebrate Easter at the Cross Church in Damascus. The area had been held by rebels. They were forced out recently by the Syrian army. One resident who attended the liturgy says the feast comes after 7 years of pain and suffering. Christians gather for Easter Mass at the site of the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzavalla, the top Catholic cleric in the Holy Land, says Mass at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Coptic Bishop of Jerusalem also attended. Pope Francis marked today, Easter Monday, by highlighting the importance of sharing dialogue and brotherhood.
È una giornata di famiglia. Dopo aver celebrato la Pasqua,
the Pope saying, after we celebrate Easter Sunday, we naturally feel the need to get together with our friends and loved ones in order to spend more time with them. Francis also issued an appeal for kidnapping victims to be released and offered a special prayer for people with autism. The Pope's comments come just one day after he calls for peace in a world marked by war and conflict. Our Vatican correspondent, Juliet Lindley, has more on the Holy Father's Easter remarks from Rome.
This Easter Sunday, the Holy Father reflected on the power of the resurrection and the hope it offers amid exclusion, hunger, and violence.
lì c'è un annuncio. Signore è risorto.
Security was tight in Rome in the wake of recent warnings about possible terror attacks. But that didn't dampen the enthusiasm of 80,000 pilgrims. They gathered in a flower-bedecked St. Peter's Square to hear Pope Francis's message.
Frutti di riconciliazione. Invochiamo per la Terra Santa.
He urged reconciliation in the Holy Land after deadly violence in recent days and called for a swift end to the civil war in Syria. Another plea from the Pope, peace in South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Venezuela and Yemen.
Frutti di dialogo imploriamo per la penisola coreana.
Turning to Asia, Francis advised the parties involved in peace talks between North and South Korea to act wisely.
Patris et Filii.
The Pope made his appeal in his annual Urbi et Orbi Easter message, Latin for to the city and the world. Earlier during Mass, he asked the faithful whether their hearts are open to the surprises of God.
E io che ho il cuore aperto alle sorprese di Dio.
The Holy Father said, those divine surprises move our hearts, and he encouraged the faithful to respond quickly. In Rome, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, the message lives on. This week marks 50 years since the death of a civil rights icon. We look back at his legacy. And turning the page, Walmart's decision to ban a popular but controversial magazine from its aisles. Today is the 13th anniversary of the death of Pope St. John Paul II. He was elected in 1978, making his 27-year-old papacy the second longest in history. JP2 was known as a staunch defender of the Catholic Church's position on the value of life and the family. He was canonized in 2014, just 9 years after his death. This week, our nation marks the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, 5 decades later, Dr. King's legacy continues on through the lives of those who knew and fought for equality alongside him. 50 years since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. And decades later, his legacy still carries on. From his granddaughter at the March for Our Lives. To the students at his alma mater.
It's inspiring. It demonstrates to our students that you can be 19, 20, 21 years old begin your legacy now.
I called him Emil because we grew up together.
As a Morehouse College student in 1960, Lonnie King Jr., no relation, remembers organizing sit-ins in Atlanta among the students there. And he remembers getting Dr. King to join them.
My point was that this is your hometown, and you're internationally known. You help us put this thing on the front pages of the world, not just Atlanta. Shock this town to its very core.
8 years later, the news of King's assassination reverberated through Atlanta, as it did across the world. Lonnie was in a meeting and was handed a note.
The note said that Dr. King has been shot in Memphis. I got this call from Coretta King asking me to handle the logistics for the funeral. There wasn't a single incident at all. But I think there was no incident because of people's respect for King.
It's respect that's persisted.
It's an interesting moment in the history of the country, and many of the things that Dr. King talked about in his time are still issues and debates that we're struggling with today.
All stemming from a man and from a movement that helped shape one of the most significant chapters in American history. Teachers in Kentucky and Oklahoma are walking off the job. They're following in the footsteps of teachers in West Virginia who protested, demanded a pay raise, and got one. Supporters marched to the state capitol building in Frankfort, Kentucky, protesting a controversial bill that passed the state legislature last week, making changes to the state's pension system. And in Oklahoma, teachers rallied for more education funding and salaries. Several public school districts, including Oklahoma City, are closed. A retail giant has a message for Cosmopolitan magazine. Walmart has removed the magazine from its checkout aisles. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation praises the move, saying Cosmo, quote, places women's value primarily on their ability to sexually satisfy a man. Cosmopolitan is still available in the magazine section, and here to discuss it is Haley Halverson, the Vice President of Advocacy and Outreach at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, where you worked with Walmart to remove these magazines from the checkout counter. Walmart says it was a business decision to do this, and it is carrying them in the other sections of the aisle. Why are you singling out Cosmo?
Well, we've been addressing Cosmo really for years, primarily because its branding really targets young girls. It has this bubblegum pink cover and Disney stars on the covers, but when you open it up, the articles are extremely graphic and encourage its young readership to engage in everything from sexting to pornography to even more extreme things like group sex, public sex, and other risky behaviors. And so we're very excited that Cosmo won't be in the Walmart checkout aisles anymore, just so it's one less drop of hypersexualized media that's bombarding families.
Is it just about sexual topics, or is it about their liberal political message? Let's take a look. Here's the lead story on Cosmo's website right now, and it's by Cecile Richards, the longtime head of Planned Parenthood. Inside the brutal fight to include women in the Affordable Care Act.
Well, we are primarily focused on sexual exploitation issues, so we're addressing the sexual exploitation side of Cosmo. But what's interesting is Cosmo really likes to wrap itself in this faux feminist mystique, when in reality, the messages that Cosmo sends about women's sexuality are actually the same messages that Playboy sends, that women are there to please men.
Are you going to target other magazines?
We're asking other retailers like Target and Walgreens to follow in Walmart's lead, and we're also asking retailers to remove the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues from checkout aisles.
Do you think that there's going to be a major backlash against this from consumers?
I actually think that consumers are going to really thank Walmart. We've already had several thousands people writing into our organization saying that they're just so happy that they can buy their groceries and not have to see Cosmo anymore.
Right, but there are so many others. I mean, there's just a sea of magazines and the tabloids that scream the headlines about affairs and lots of different sexual acts, as you say. So isn't this just sort of a drop in the bucket and more of a statement?
Well, I think that it is significant because while, National Enquirer, some other news article might occasionally have these articles, every single issue with Cosmo is filled with this. And again, it's often targeting young girls. So I do think that it is actually very significant, but it also is a statement that we can't have a society that's fighting against sexual abuse when we're also accepting sexual objectification of women.
Those airline miles where they say, okay, fill out this here for, to get all these magazines. And I have checked a couple of those, the Cosmo, Glamour, Let's See. And they come into my house where I have a teenage daughter and I throw them away right away because exactly of what you're saying, because of those messages for very young girls. Thank you so much. I know that you've got a Global Summit to End Sexual Exploitation here in Washington in June, and we'll have you back then to talk about that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Haley Halverson, Vice President of Advocacy and Outreach at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation.
Thank you.
Up next, In the Zone. On the night of the NCAA Men's Championship game, we talk about the significant role Catholic schools play in college basketball. And they're on a roll. Young and old participate in a time-honored tradition at the White House. Just in time for Easter, a church in Colombia donates 250,000 communion wafers to Catholics in that border country of Venezuela. This after a flour shortage. Volunteers wrapped the wafers in plastic bags to protect them from the rain. Church leaders in Colombia said it was their moral duty to help Venezuelans celebrate Holy Week. A Catholic school wins the women's college basketball national title in a nail-biter last night, and another is going to play for the men's title tonight. Top-seeded Villanova plays for the men's championship. It faces number 3 seed Michigan. The Wildcats set an NCAA record for the most three-pointers in a season. They have made more than 450. And Notre Dame wins the women's championship on a three-pointer with 1/10 of a second remaining. Look at this shot by Arike Ogumbawale. She hit it in a 61-58 victory Sunday night over Mississippi State. She also hit the winner with 1 second left in the semifinals against Connecticut. Coach Muffet McGraw says, it's Easter Sunday. All the Catholics were praying for us. The Fighting Irish won their only other national title in 2001, also on Easter. Talk about this Catholic angle in this year's March Madness. We are joined by Doug Eldridge, a sports agent, PR consultant. He's the managing partner of DLE Agency. Welcome back, Doug.
Thanks for having me.
We all saw that Notre Dame three-pointer shot just at the end. Everybody went crazy. Was that divine intervention?
Who am I to bet against the Irish on Easter Sunday? What a game.
Tell us why Catholic teams are doing so well. You know this a lot better than I do, but last year a Jesuit school, Gonzaga, reached the men's title game. 2 years ago, Villanova won the title.
Right.
And now we've seen what we're seeing this year.
Well, I think the Catholics as a whole in the sporting landscape are really on a run, no pun intended. I mean, look at this year's tournament alone. Half the number 1 seeds were Catholic, 8 of the 64 teams. Notre Dame just won, right? And all of this played out on Easter weekend, which couldn't have been a better backdrop. So all of the eyes, and more importantly, all of the hearts were in the right place.
Let's talk about, speaking of hearts, 98-year-old Sister Jean Schmidt.
What a
so,
story.
I know, she was the team chaplain, she was the underdog, media darling.
And unofficial scout as well.
Oh yeah, right, exactly. One magazine called her, I think, the face of a tournament, and the Ramblers, the Loyola Chicago Ramblers, were knocked out, but they did make it to the Final Four. Tell me about her. Why are the media so invested in her?
Well, who would have thought that someone approaching 99 years old is ironically the face of the future? And I think in so many ways she can be as it relates to Catholic sports and Catholic schools in the broader NCAA landscape. The thing about Sister Jean, which is who we're talking about, her message and her authenticity, work, worship, win, her mantra, which has now been licensed to over 30 different items from bobbleheads to t-shirts to socks. Her message is so authentic and so organic and so real that it hits both of the two boxes for marketing, relatable and aspirational. And in so doing, she is the story, over 21,000 unique stories about Sister Jean alone, which completely dwarfs the second and third place, which are 10,000, 5,000 respectively. Wow. She, in so many ways, is the story of this tournament.
Let's talk about that licensing deal. Are you
Absolutely.
Kidding me? Tell me about that, and who gets that money?
Well, at this point, the cursory understanding is that it'll be initially channeled to the athletic department, and then secondarily to her group, which I believe is the Sisters of the Blessed Virgin Mary, right? So, what's notable,
bobbleheads, socks,
and here's what I would urge in the macro. But this is what I would urge, because so much that has been licensed borders on tchotchke, right? Bobblehead, T-shirt, socks. But I think she's not a mascot, but she's most assuredly a messenger for a new generation, not only of sports fans, but faith-based sports fans. Those that know that they are, and perhaps those that just need to be reminded or need to hear that message through a different messenger. And I think in so many ways she is that person.
And it's not something that you hear if you were watching the Super Bowl halftime show, right, as I was, and you're watching a lot of other sporting events where messages of faith aren't often what are being talked about. And if there are faith issues, they are not talked about in the best light.
A point of criticism,
exactly,
as a point of an aspirational point of admiration and something to work towards, right? And I think one of the things that was so neat is with this new CBS TNT media deal for NCAA, it's almost $1 billion a year for the NCAA, meaning the tournament, which means it's on tablets, it's on phones, it's on multiple screens. So her message, this is where I'm going, her message penetrated, perhaps most importantly, the millennial generation, which is disenfranchised, disengaged, and largely disinterested.
N-O-N-E-S.
And I don't say that to disparage the millennials by any means, but when you find somebody like Sister Jean, who with no effort and receiving not a penny of any of her licensing deals, connects with an audience that can be that difficult to penetrate, you found something. You have a messenger. And how appropriate is it that we're talking about Sister Jean on the 13th anniversary of arguably the most marketable person in modern day faith, and by marketable I really mean relatable, Pope John Paul.
Doug Eldridge, managing partner at DLE Agency, thank you so much. Well, we saw a lot of happy children on the South Lawn of the White House today. The First Family welcomed nearly 30,000 people to this year's Easter egg roll. And some of the First Family you see right there. President Trump's children and grandchildren joined in. A military band played. This year's activities, of course, that normal egg roll, taking that spoon and trying to move it all the way down there. They had decorating in the coloring wall, and okay, here's that Easter bunny. Look at those glasses. I don't know. Does the Easter bunny have glasses standing next to the Trumps? I'm not quite sure. My Easter bunny, I don't know about you, Doug, but my Easter bunny did not have glasses.
All the carrots. You think it'd be good eyesight, right?
Oh, bada bing, bada boom, and we're out.
I'll be here all week.
For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn with my sidekick, Doug Eldridge. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you. Good night.